It's everyone is composing forward. Where if I have an idea here, bump it, and there's an inherent through
You're on
line.
the ride.
Yes. Every cue in this film is like that. He is on overdrive, the whole score, and every piece is like a concerto for orchestra where they're just busting their ass. So it's funny. We've only done one of these, and yet I'm already going to say this is going to be a little different from normal. As if there's 50 in a row to establish a pattern. But I think this is probably going to be a bit of an outlier from how I tend to do these going forward, because I really love going deep with something, but I'm going to be a little bit breadthy today.
Breathy or breadthy?
Breadthy. I'm going wide as opposed to going deep. At a screening about 10 years ago, Philip Glass was doing a Q&A. He is not the composer whose work we'll be featuring, but I remember this quote popped up into my head, and it's a good jumping off point. Okay. Someone noticed, well, anyone who's ever listened to his music has noticed this, that basically every piece kind of sounds the same. The Philip Glass gesture of most of them pretty much boil down to that, right? It's being very reductive of one of the great artists of the 20th century, but I find his
wasn't he the one that did what's you love this opening of what's the movie where it's the runner going through New York, going through Central Park? It opens with that.
That's Desplat, who has a lot of Philip Glass in him.
Okay,
but no, that's the movie Birth.
Huh?
Yeah, no, there's definite connective tissue there. But so someone asked, they were trying to find a tactful way to ask him, what is in his mind when he basically just sits down to write a new symphony, a new film score, and it just once again is the exact same thing, just over and over, always the same. And his response, they tried to ask him in a way that was like, there's some familiarity, or there's some continuity from one piece to a next, and I'm curious.
Some running themes that we're picking up on.
Yeah, exactly. And his reply was, sometimes when I'm working on a project, I'll come up with an idea, but the full extent of where that idea seems to want to go won't fit within the one project, so I'll end up continuing to explore it on a subsequent project. Something along those lines was his reply. I personally call bullshit on that, because at least, I just don't know what he thinks he's exploring still out of that gesture, that he didn't thoroughly unpack in the many symphonies and, Einstein on the Beach and his many film scores. And it's not that it's bad. I just thought that was kind of deflecting. That was trying to put a polished spin. What he should have said, and I'm being guilty of attempting to read his mind, so take this with a grain of salt. But what he should have said was, I just fucking like that, and get off my fucking back already, to quote the pitch meeting. I'm going to need you to climb right off of that thing. And I'm a big fan. My fanboyness is out of control. So, but there is something interesting to that notion of when a composer has a thing that they're playing with, whether consciously or unconsciously, that makes subsequent appearances in their work. It's a tendency towards a certain type of gesture, certain structures to their melodies. An obvious example of this would be the way that John Williams uses triplets in his melodic figures as a kind of flourish. It's in so
Give
many.
me an example.
So that's a triplet. You nailed it.
That's
Oh dear.
Would that actually be a quintuple or quartet?
Well, no, triplet and then landing on the next beat.
Right.
But an example, you take the love theme, for example, from the Attack of the Clones. compare it with the theme to Born on the 4th of July. You know, there's you can feel that they're the same. They're not the same, but they're very obviously the same composer.
Is that because that's almost the language that they speak, and so they can only use the lexicon, the vocabulary that they're familiar with?
I think it's. I don't.
Is
I mean, that's
it
one way
evidence
to
of a
phrase it.
limitation? That's is it evidence of a limitation, or is it a?
It's a great question. So, depending on who you ask, yes. Danny Elfman once said his greatest compliment is if someone hears a piece of music by him and says, "I can't believe that's Danny Elfman."
Same thing.
And so, yeah. And so, and actually, and you're a perfect kind of literal analogy of this, because I don't think it's limitation. I think it's the composer's voice. And your voice is just a part of who you are. It's the emergent properties that come about as a result of all the different things you've listened to, the times you've had your heart broken, the times you've been on top of, on cloud nine, all those things, they gradually accrue. This is why my number one advice is often make sure you go live an interesting life, because the composers that are the most generic tend to be the ones that just all they do is sit in front of their computer all day trying to write music and, network and stuff. And they forget that, the really compelling composers tend to have some stories to tell, and that's really informed who they are as a composer.
I talked to a young actor who said, I just don't want to be stuck working at Coffee Bean trying to be an actor. I want to be like out there trying to do that. I'm like, where do you think you become an actor? You become an actor at Coffee Bean, because
100%.
You're in the middle of the human condition. You get to meet the people, and you pull from those people that are characters. Everything that Seth...
Plus, what an amazing place to do that, because you have basically this turnstile of new
buffet
humans.
of people.
Yeah, exactly.
You look at someone like Seth MacFarlane, who, one way or another has appropriated different characters and turned them into characters. And I think that's what the point of the actors, we're always pulling from something. But even like Brad Pitt, if you notice, Brad Pitt has a running theme of eating.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
That's his thing.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I ever noticed that until Ocean's 11, and then from that point forward, I'm like, that's in all of his movies.
Fight Club, doesn't it? Fight Club, it's something that he does for whatever reason. We believe him when he eats.
Yeah, right.
Al Pacino has his thing. No matter if he's playing Merchant of Venice, if he's doing Shylock, or if he's doing,
Big Boy.
Heat. Big Boy Caprice.
Mm-hmm. Oscar-nominated
Wow.
role.
Did he really get Oscar nominated for fucking Dick Tracy?
Yep. That movie, Stephen Sondheim wrote the songs that Madonna is singing in the club, and he won an Oscar for that. The one and only time he's won an Oscar. I mean, admittedly, he's barely touched film compared to theater, but he won an Oscar for Dick Tracy.
How did we allow that to happen?
Oh, that movie's awesome.
Is it?
Yes, I just watched it less than a week ago. I hadn't seen it since it came out, 21 years ago.
91?
31 years ago. 90, I think. 90? 91, yeah. Yeah. There's no movie like it. It's so
I agree.
It's so bizarre and unique and colorful.
I used to watch the cartoon, like the original cartoon, where it was like, hey, all you guys that are working on Mr. Magoo, can you go do this Dick Tracy cartoon? And I was really into Dick Tracy. So that when it came out, I was like, Warren Beatty isn't Dick Tracy.
See, I only ever looked into Dick Tracy after the movie. The movie was what broke the seal for me. So I didn't have that problem. But in any case...
Go ahead, please.
So it's all circling the same idea of composers have a strong voice, and some, like Goldsmith, and it takes a lot of resistance to not just make all of these about Goldsmith, but
sure.
Some of these, some composers have a voice that's very subtle, and then they can be very eclectic and never stop being themselves, and yet can explore a million different musical languages. Some really only sound like themselves doing one thing or a couple of things. So I wanted to play for you. There's no way you haven't heard this, because it's just so omnipresent in our culture right now. I'm this is very much a hit of our times. So let's see how quickly you pick up what it is. Clock that instantly.
Star Trek, man. Hell yeah.
What the fuck?
No, of course. No, it's the first time where I was like, we first started doing Avengers before really that had hit. Like they were like, oh shit, we should probably get on this Avengers thing. And so you start recording in anticipation of all these things rolling out. So by the time that
you don't mean the game, you mean the animated
series.
Yeah.
And like there've been a couple of iterations before that because they were like, there may be something to this new Iron Man thing that they're doing.
Right.
So by the time it became Avengers and that score came out, I was like, this is the first time that it felt like the score that belonged to this era. Like that we finally had a theme for this new, cinematic movement that was happening where it's like, we are going to dominate the theaters. There's really no other movies that you will think of coming out in this period of time other than the slew of Marvel shit that we threw at you.
It's pretty insane. Famously, has been pretty lackluster on the musical side with a few exceptions. And there's even a viral video. So you beat me to the punch. So that little phrase, what I started playing here was the end credits from the first Avengers 2012. Alan Silvestri did the score, and that little that melody literally only appears in the end credits. It's not the theme. There really isn't a theme throughout the score that is being used in that way, but there is this little motif that you just sang that sounds kind of like, to my ear, and I'm not speaking for dear Al, this almost is just a transitional little, not a throwaway, but just a gesture to get you between A and B, which is the right that shows up here in the track. So
but see that right there. If you said that's why you said that the whole Avengers thing when I went womp 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 womp. That's what I think of. That's the hands on hips. Womp, 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 womp.
Well, see, here's my hypothesis. It was never really originally designed to be that, but
kind of like Snuffy did for West Wing. It was never meant to be the theme.
Is that true? You may know something I don't know there.
I'm so deep into West Wing right now, but Snuffy never wrote the theme to be a theme. It was something else, but they were like, that's the theme because it sounds exactly like Air Force One.
Oh, that's funny. There are a lot of stories like that. Bear told the story on, they were doing the pilot of Walking Dead and they couldn't figure out what the title theme should be. So he was just going about his business scoring the episode. And there was just this one scene where he just wrote this kind of like, and what's his name? What's the EP? The director.
Damn it! Don't put me into your shit.
It's like a fucking legendary director. Nope.
It's not,
I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Who directed all the Stephen King stuff.
Don't. I want to get there.
It's killing me that I can't think of his name. He's such a
Darabont.
Darabont, yeah. He said, I think it was Darabont that said that's our theme, and just singled out what to Bear was effectively just one of the cues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had this hypothesis that the theme to the Avengers, it's not even really a theme. It's just this motif. That was not really intended to be the thing, but then it just somehow got picked up on by the public, and I started noticing it in trailers for the MCU stuff. So flash forward to Endgame, the big moment from the end of the movie where, it's called Portals on the album, and it's the moment where all the portals are opening up and every hero that they've spent the last fucking 15 years introducing the public to all start arriving, and that's where Silvestri just goes for it with this theme.
Dude, it's so funny, man. I want to be like, it's whatever and try to pick it apart. But it is the profundity and a beauty of simplicity. Because when I hear that, it's like I get chills and I get emotional.
Me too.
And I don't know how it is possible I mean, I can shit on all the Marvel movies and be like, God, they did this. It's so formulaic. But you play that, especially in that moment, I want to get weepy right now. I'm like, because that's the moment where it's the darkest moment in the movie. And it's like the quietest, we're here. We got your back. And it takes me back to every moment that we were there in the theater, popcorn in hand, the anticipation right before the lights go down. It makes me miss going to movie theaters.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's like the lights go down. You're like, here we go. For good or for bad, this is the army that I'm going to battle with, and we're going to be on the other side. And it's just literally like, I'll see you on the other side. And you have all whatever preamble they're trying to set up. And that's clever that they're doing this, or they're doing this different than the comic book. Oh, that's interesting. They did this. And everything, all of your speculation, everything that you're wondering if the movie's going to be, just suspends in the beautiful air of disbelief the second that you hear that you're like, let's fucking go.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that Silvestri has a real gift for that. But the reason I'm playing it is because when I first heard that, I remember people, there were a lot of people who probably didn't know who he was, but because they're young and they're getting into the Marvel movies, like teenagers and stuff,
right.
Who this is their entry point to the body of work of Alan Silvestri. Whereas people like you and I have been familiar with his work one way or the other for most of our life. And
right.
So, because when I heard that, I remember saying, it's funny that the theme that catches fire is one that he's basically been writing versions of throughout his whole career. In the spirit of the thing we were talking about at the beginning, that couldn't be a more exemplary example, terrible phrasing, of his voice as a composer. And I'm going to prove it to you with my subsequent pieces here. So here's, if you think of the gesture of leaping up and then stepping down, but then also he loves those harmonies of this walk up to the beat, up to the tonic, where the bass is going.
What does that mean of the tonic?
Just like the root of the key that you're in. Like if I'm playing this in C, then to go A flat, B flat, C. That's a gesture you will find in all of his, especially the heroic scores. And so I can take it back. I can take it back to the original. Basically the same thing. Imagine it as it's the building blocks are fundamentally identical, and so he's just Al being Al. So like the thing that's really different, of course, that's really its own thing. But as soon as you have the
I would
sort of
never
the
have
beat
thought.
part,
Hold on. This is blowing my mind. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
dun,
'cause it's
dun, 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 dun.
dun, dun. But
the
what's
same.
happening is it's actually going up.
It's not even. It's just, you throw in a few notes in between. Like imagine if I just played it like this.
wow.
It's really, and so remember the first time I heard it, I just thought, well, that's one of those where I could have clocked it as Silvestri without knowing who scored it, because I've heard this gesture through the different lens of a different film, but it's still, and that's the thing. He's not being lazy.
That's
just
exactly
his
the
voice.
word I was about to use. It's his fingerprint.
Exactly.
It is as much, it's not a smudge, it's a print. And that's why you get Alan Silvestri to give you those. So I'm looking at I wanted to pull up his Back to the Future brought it because I forgot that was Alan Silvestri.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and get this. Great story with Back to the Future. Remember what you were about to ask, but there's just such a great story where before that, he famously was called in very last second to demo for Romancing the Stone, and that's what brought him and Zemeckis to each other's lives. He was, before that, mostly known as the guy that had done the show Chips in the 70s. Silvestri was a guitarist, kind of a jazz guy. He'd worked with small combos. Yeah. So, big, pretty much. So, full-blown, old-fashioned orchestral scores was not part of his MO at all. And so by the time it comes to do Back to the Future, Zemeckis knows that that's what he wants. By then we're in a post-Star Wars, post-Indiana Jones kind of era where that's very much in vogue. Zemeckis likes that. And he he's like, Al, are you going to be able to do this? Al had never written for large orchestra before. This was literally his first time. So you're saying
that those movies, do you feel changed the landscape for the way that scores were done?
Oh yeah, you mean like Indiana Jones? Star Wars is the one very famously that did, because the reigning supreme, examples of how scores were being done were like Isaac Hayes over here doing Shaft, and then you had the Bee Gees and David Shire on Saturday Night Fever, and the whole era of songs instead of score, or electronics, pop music influencing it. That was very much and the orchestra was rapidly dying. And when John Williams did Star Wars, everything changed overnight again. And suddenly everyone goes, ooh, we like that. And he pretty much single-handedly brought back what was considered to be very, very old-fashioned. So the 80s is full of all these really huge orchestral scores, as all these people were trying to put, get the genie out of the bottle more than once, both John Williams and people emulating him. Even Jerry Goldsmith said when he was hired for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, they basically said, look, we want you to kind of figure out how to do the whole Star Wars thing, but somehow not that. And of course he managed to somehow do that amazingly, but it was explicitly in reaction to the popularity of Star Wars. So I think Back to the Future is part of that, the wake of that. It's obviously a few years, half a decade later, but still.
Wasn't I think Family Guy even does this, where they kind of mock the fact that 70s sci-fi was a bunch of Moog synthesizers. Yep.
And Jerry was he was the guy doing those scores. Jerry did Planet of the Apes and Logan's Run and innumerable others of that ilk, that yes, they were very sort of dystopian and dark, and there was exactly, there was nothing lush and romantic about it.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm looking at his credits. Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Lilo and Stitch, Polar Express.
All Zemeckis films.
Lilo and Stitch?
No, but I'm saying he has done every Zemeckis film.
Yeah.
Like, because you mentioned Polar Express.
Polar, Forrest Gump, Ron Howard, but also Bob Zemeckis produced, right?
No, Zemeckis directed that for sure.
I thought Ron Howard did Forrest Gump. Robert Zemeckis, yeah. Man, is there? Do you feel it's a good thing to be a composer that is? If you want an audience, because I would not think of Forrest Gump as a hero. I would think that Marty McFly has heroic moments, and that's when that brass comes in, or it's the moment when the DeLorean just swoops in right at the moment and picks him up, and that's when those big that is the heroic theme, I would say.
Yep, 100%.
And I think that you can, the reason why I would say it's a theme is the orchestration or the arrangement, the voicing of it doesn't have to be brass.
True.
Because he does it with strings as well, right?
Oh yeah, you could do it.
So
any
it's
number of
calling
ways.
back to that thing where this is. He could call it whatever he wants. Actually, it's not heroism; it's fate. And it's every time you hear that theme, that what I'm trying to convey is this is your fate. It's stepping into your fate. It's changing your fate. Where you can even take that and minor it, and now you're seeing a darker fate. That to me is what a theme is. But I wouldn't think that guy is the guy you get for what would become the blueprint for heroes.
For the Marvel scores, you mean?
Right. But by the same token, neither is Danny Elfman.
Oh yeah, and
And that's probably the best. As good as that what that makes me feel when I hear that Alan Silvestri cue, and that bum 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 bum, it is nothing compared to Batman. How do you do that?
Well, Elfman, they Warner Brothers resisted heavily hiring Danny Elfman for that. They said Elfman's noteworthy
Beetlejuice
credits.
guy?
Yeah, the Beetlejuice, the Pee Wee Herman, the Back to School, Oingo Boingo guy doesn't do. We want something dark and brooding and serious. And Tim Burton basically had to cash in all of his political chips because this movie was a big reach for him too as a director, and he had to basically go at bat. And my agent Richard, this was his first ever client. He was in his late 20s representing Elfman on the heels of Beetlejuice, and so then negotiates this contract and was at the recording studio in London when they started tracking it. And he said they started with the main titles, and the first time that he felt very instinctively, this business is not going to be different, is not going to be the same after this comes out. He just thought this is a watershed score I'm watching be recorded right here.
And the
but
important
they
thing
didn't
to
want
point
it to
out,
exist initially.
The important thing to point out is in 88 or 89. I'm assuming the movie came out in 89, so that's probably when the score was probably done because it's pretty much you've locked a picture and you're about to put it out.
Certainly,
in 89, we don't have like right now on this computer. I could have whatever orchestral library that I want. I could have hundreds of pianos.
Oh yeah, exactly. I know where you're going with this, and you're absolutely
simple.
correct.
So if I needed to show someone, it's going to sound a little bit like this. I can do that. It won't be, obviously, we're going to have Tina Guo. Obviously, we're going to have, this person. But here's the part that I can write, and I can give you a mock-up. You don't have that in 85. You don't have that in 89. You don't have that really in 94 for Forrest Gump.
No, yeah. I mean, you don't really have it pervasively until probably around after 2000, because the only people that even really went deep down that hole were the ones who were really interested in the tech, like Hans Zimmer, Jerry Goldsmith.
Hans Zimmer.
Like they were making mock-ups and stuff because they thought the technology was so cool. But the old school guys rode as long as they could in the prior era of you just show up to the recording session and that's when you get to hear it. And if you have notes,
but do you think
more sessions?
Do you think that the advent of that technology actually hurt the art of composition, of musical composition and scoring for films, because once we're there and you're at Abbey Road and you're going, I know there's a bunch of black marks on that white piece of paper and there's about 80 people here with instruments in front of them. I have no idea what I'm about to hear. I have nothing but faith and trust. And 6 months or whatever, or 2 months or a year of investing in this individual, and you see the baton come up and you hear the downbeat of measure one. I can't help but think as a producer, as a director, you want it to work, because if it doesn't, you are monumentally fucked.
Well, you weren't fucked in the old days because there was a certain assumption of there will be pickup sessions that we do to address changes. That was built into the budget because this was the only way to work.
Okay.
But it meant that you had to get pretty damn close. You couldn't re-record the whole score unless it was a catastrophe.
Yeah,
so
but
yes.
what if, like, tonally it's wrong? What does that happen?
I mean, there's a
where it's
famous
like-
example of that. I just was watching a thing the other day of William Friedkin tried to hire Bernard Herrmann to score The Exorcist, and Herrmann, you know, was famous for the Hitchcock scores and was in the later years of his career.
That's who you
Watched
get.
he watched the movie and he hated it, and so he basically was like, I can try to save this piece of shit, and he demanded a bunch of stuff, and Friedkin was very turned off by it and very heartbroken by the hostility of the meeting, so they parted ways. So then he went and hired Lalo Schifrin, who was not really known for horror. He had done like the Amityville horror and things, but he was known obviously as, you know, Mission Impossible and you know, a bunch of cutting edge TV and Bullet and all that kind of stuff. And so Lalo Schifrin wrote this really aggressive horror score, and Friedkin was sitting there while like 100 musicians were recording it, and he felt like this is 100% not right for the film, and he had to go to Schifrin and say, I'm sorry, but this isn't gonna work. And they ended up just licensing music that they could find, which is how you end up with the, you know, the tubular bells. That was just a needle drop that they found that they felt worked.
What?
Yeah. So he went through two composers, or one and a half, because Lalo Schifrin actually wrote and recorded music. And Friedkin was like, this is just not The Exorcist. It's not what I'm
Wait a
after.
minute. The from Exorcist is just some...
It was this existing song, effectively, that they found.
Does anybody ever get credit for that?
Mike Oldfield, yeah, the writer, yeah, oh yeah, made him a lot of money, I suspect. It's not. It's sold as the theme to The Exorcist in the way that Strauss's also Sprach Zarathustra is sold as the theme to 2001, but obviously that was written before movies existed, so there's no, at least movies as we know them. So yeah,
What's the one that is? It says like every.
Are you thinking
big...
of? Oh, you mean the you know. That?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Carl Orff's. I thought you were going for The Omen. Carl Orff's O Fortuna, which is a big tone poem he wrote. That's the opening movement of it. Yes, that is also basically the blueprint to all big dramatic orchestra and choir music that has been written subsequently.
Because it just kind of goes through all the movements, you know. Every conceivable thing.
And it's pretty damn masterful.
I cannot imagine who is more nervous in that situation where you're sitting there and the caliber and again, I go back to strip away the technology and strip away the ability, which I think now allows for a more iterative and collaborative process, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm
not disparaging it.
For sure. I was gonna make that point, that the films, I think, they've benefited from our ability to dial in very exactly what we want. Whereas, you know, before it would be, I like this score for the most part, but there's a handful of moments that if I could, I would change them.
We'll
but
go back and change
I just
it.
don't have the ability.
But it's the difference of Pam's a photographer, and she's a brilliant photographer, but there's a part of her that romantically wants to work with film. And I know several photographers that
it's like recording
they
on
would
tape.
rather. Yeah, dude, it's like, no, we're locked to this.
Yep.
And it's, you don't get, there's a famous scene or not necessarily famous, but what's his name in
Frank Darabont.
Secret Life of Walter Mitty, not Ben Hur. I'm doing bad on names
Ben
today.
Stiller.
But not Ben Stiller, but Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Mystic River.
He's in that? I never saw that movie.
Yeah. Oh, you would love the movie.
I've heard that
what's
I
his
would
name?
love the movie.
Why can I not think of his name? And
We're
I
terrible
really
with
feel
names
like
today.
I might get something, like some kind of. His name is, I can see his face. Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
I can't think of it.
Oh my God. Director of, it won an Oscar for Milk. It's gonna hurt. Sean Penn.
That's not who I thought you were. That's not who I thought you were fixated on. And then when you said Milk, my brain was doing a rapid realignment because I said, well, that's Sean Penn. I did not know he was in Walter Mitty at all.
Yeah. So there's a beautiful moment in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty where Sean Penn, who is this, on almost like an Annie Leibovitz style. I don't know who he was patterned after, but it was someone who had always shot covers for Time magazine, I think it was. And he's been camped out on the side of this mountain, and he's trying to photograph a snow leopard. And he was like, there's no pictures of him. And so he's like, Ben Stiller's trying to bug him, and he's like, I need you to go away because this is the epitome of my life right now, is I'm going to capture this. And he doesn't have a 5D, he's got a film camera. And he's sitting there and he goes, and he sees the snow leopard peek out, and he just goes, It's not about capturing it. It's about I could have if I wanted to. But the beauty of analog is that whatever you get the mistakes. And it's whatever your exposure was. Well, you can always fix stuff in the way that you develop it, but the composition, everything else is baked in. It's not like, I'm going to come in and Photoshop this later. So to me, there's so much more baked in trust that is inherent and necessary from the onset than there is built over time. Working with a composer, like we can work together and be like, man, through this process, there was some push and some pull. We came back, and I'm really grateful for the ground you gave and the ground you won. But as opposed to, do you understand what I'm trying to say? It's like, I think I do. And you go off and you write and you come back and we're sitting there. It's like, we're paying a lot of money for this orchestra. And yes, you can go, we're going to have pickups and we're going to change this. But to me, there's just a beauty that's been lost in knowing you can change it when you can't. And I can't help but think that there's some things where you're like, I wanted the sheer context of how you're hearing that music allows you to love it a little bit more.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be a Steven Spielberg at the scoring stage, hearing Jaws played back, having only ever had a vague sense from John Williams at his piano.
Hearing it on a piano.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's something to that. And I can see why directors like our tools today better from the standpoint of, they can probably be a little bit more objective and clear-headed as well. That
it requires less faith. It requires less faith, and it assuages fear better. It takes the onus off of them.
And they can make their imprint on it as well. They can work with, you can hear, for example, there's 3 different composers now that have worked on Christopher Nolan films, and you can actually hear his influence over those composers because they sound different with him than with other directors. And I think that's probably true of Spielberg as well, who has only a couple of times worked with someone other than John Williams. But, when you listen to his other scores, you can hear that the encouragement of him, his Spielbergian tendencies. Let me play a few more to amuse you before you have to bolt, because there's a lot. And this is one of those, I really, really love Alan Silvestri. And so when I heard this Avengers motif, it made me smile because I thought, I've been enjoying variations on that for all intents and purposes for 20 years. Here's one. Let's see if you know this one. This is not a particularly well-remembered film.
Ishtar. It's hold on. It's not. I want to say something like it's not the Phantom or
it's not the Phantom. You're thinking right vibe and right era.
Alec Baldwin. The Shadow.
The Shadow. Not that either. Jerry scored that film. It's an awesome theme. But you're in the right track of 90s superhero films.
Darkman?
Nope, that's Elfman. But you're in the right vein. Here's the theme that has that same Silvestri thumbprint on it. And you'll realize, wow, that's the Avengers. can hear it though, right? Except he's all in minor. It was
What is
terribly
that?
played, but
I am the law.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, it was.
you were right in there. You were right with that same sort of vibe and flavor. Judge Dredd. So yeah,
Judge
but
Dredd.
you can hear, right? It's you're like that. It's a cousin
that
of
nice-
these other.
It's a marching cadence.
That part separates it for sure from the straightforward, like the fact that it's so locked in time. But that bum 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 bum, it's the same. It's the thumbprint. This.
Yes. Now
See what I mean?
this is like the same moment where someone played Gustav Holst's Planet Suite for me, and I can never not hear that whenever I hear Star Wars now, or rather.
People make that criticism of Williams all the time. That
I don't think it's
essentially-
necessarily criticism. I think it's actually, listen, we get this all the time. When I got cast as Talion in Shadow of Mordor, it was like Sean Bean. I was like, got it. And so instantly the dialect moved to like Sheffield or Kent as opposed to, London, where the tendency would be. It's like, no, let's move this guy further north, and so that he feels more like he's from the country as opposed to from the city kind of thing. And even though it exists outside of both of those constructs. But to me, I look at that as an analog, and someone going, I want Gustav Holst. It's like, all right, I'll give you Gustav Holst. I'll give you. I remember where I was when I first heard Peter and the Wolf, and I understood theme. I understood it's like everybody gets this. When you hear this means this, because you had to somehow find a way to represent that. And I was like, got it. Therefore. Flute equals bird. Therefore, oboe equals fox. Therefore,
duck,
bassoon.
come on.
Or duck. Sorry, duck. It's like I texted you the other night. I was like, oboe is the most sentimental instrument.
Yeah, I screenshotted that and sent it to my oboe player.
It's the most. If you want schmaltz, give me an oboe. It's the most '90s mauve.
Love oboe. All right, I'll bring it home with one last one, which
All right.
ironically, all of this is run up to this, because this is the one I actually originally wanted to share. As soon as we started doing this, I started making a list of all these things that I just love and just am excited to share. And then when I realized, I want to share this one, but I should share it in the context of recognizing this whole Alan Silvestri fingerprint thing, because that adds an extra layer. But also this, to me, is a score that is an uncelebrated masterpiece, because it's a sequel to an already very goofy movie. So I'll just tell you in advance what this
Goofy
one
movie?
is. Well, yeah, I'll tell you in advance what this one is. But the reason why, again,
No, don't tell me. I want to guess. I want to be able to guess.
all right, fine. Well, I'll just say this was a movie where Jerry Goldsmith scored the first movie, and there's a story I heard where he was essentially talking shit about the movie right in front of the director while conducting the orchestra, and it was not well received, so he was not invited to score the sequel. So Alan Silvestri is brought in to score the sequel and wrote a score that I think is one of the greats of his career, and it will never be recognized as such because it has to survive that accolade in the light of Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Castaway, The Avengers, et cetera, et cetera. He's written so many, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. There's so many classics of him. As the fucking Predator, which is just such a freaking amazing score as well. So he has all these others that this one I think will often go overlooked. So just listen to this. There's two bits of it I would love to play, and I'm just going to let them run through, and I won't say anything, because I want you to enjoy just how much fucking work everyone in the orchestra has to do. And I don't just mean it's busy. They're playing real parts, and it's very musically conceived. It's not just deet da deet da deet ga. New idea. New idea. Bum ba da ba da ba da. New idea. It's everyone is composing forward. Where if I have an idea here, you know, bum ba dum ba dum ba bum bum, and there's an inherent through
You're on
line.
the ride.
Yes. Every cue in this film is like that. He is on overdrive, the whole score, and every piece is like a concerto for orchestra where they're just busting their ass. And in the heart of it is this theme, which is basically the theme to the Avengers, but you would never, in this way, you would never use it in the Avengers because it's got a campiness to it that's perfect for this movie. But you'll hear it instantly. The building blocks are actually fundamentally the same.
Okay,
and I fucking love it.
Mummy? I called it.
That was the first excerpt. Yep, the Mummy returns. Jerry did the Mummy.
First one, and then
Silvestri
Alan
did the
did the
Mummy
second
Returns.
one.
Yep. So that theme.
Oh my God, I love the score to the first one.
Can't you hear how it's basically the same as all
Totally.
these others, right? It's even the literal exact same harmonies as the Avengers with the, you know, except now it's, and then he adds this. And again, this is not laziness. This is not, he may not even be fully aware that he's doing this, but when you hear it, you're like, there's Silvestri. And listen, here's one last one, and then I'll let you go. I'll let this one run for a couple minutes if you're down, because it's just the sheer virtuosity of both the composing and the performance by the orchestra is unbelievable. And what's great is you watch the scene and it's literally just an action set piece of them on a double-decker bus weaving through London.
I know exactly. I know it very well.
You know that scene. All right, so
Very beginning of the movie.
Listen to how hard Silvestri is working to convince you of everything going on screen. I'll let it roll there because it's like a 7-minute cue of just he's relentless with the orchestra.
Well, it's also the thing that I love specifically, and what I'm learning more about is the fact that when I write a song, I'm writing it based upon my conditions and my rules. Right?
Sure,
There's nothing external that's driving it. I choose the tempo. I choose where the 1 and the 4, or the 1 and the 3 and the 2 and the 4 land. I choose all that. But this is, why do you put the bomb there, is because that is what's corresponding with what's happening on screen. And so therefore meter and everything else don't apply, because everything is an Everything is like operating within this, and you have to keep, there are no physics. It's like designing. It's like making somebody walk inside of a video game. There's no physics. You have to create gravity in order for that to apply. It's mind-boggling to me.
And to me, the real art of great film scoring is writing what is a thrilling and exhausting and fabulous piece of music while also wrapping tightly around what the footage is dictating to you. You know, all those little moments, like the moment where you said, wow, that sounds like Back to the Future. That's actually that bum ba da da yum ba dum is different from the main theme, and it's actually the moment where the shotgun falls in front of Rachel Weisz's character and she picks it up and she blasts the guy, and so it's like a slightly different melody for her than for Brendan Fraser's character. And so he's having to weave all this together, and the fact that there's little internal musical motifs of this, like the thing at the end there with the he's creating ideas that are spinning around, and it's not just a succession of essentially sound effects. The easiest way to do this is to just have percussion the whole time going because it's exciting, and it will pretty much feel like it's matching the footage no matter what, because there's so many things going on. But he's done something that's an order of magnitude more difficult than that, which is really write a piece of music that also perfectly corresponds to the scene. And nobody in the orchestra got off the hook here. It's one of those where I love cues like this where you just know
the flutes and the violins are just going. I mean, it's just like it's sixteenths, right, the entire time, right? It's just those.
Probably, who knows how it's notated, but it is.
I was looking at it as like a 1 a 2 a 3 a 4. That's a 16th note to me. So I mean, they're just. It's just like you said. It's relentless. I will to put a button on this for me. What you've pointed out to me is that in the same way that you look at a writer, like you brought up Stephen King or Cormac McCarthy, or any of the ones where you're like, man, I really enjoy their writing because they have a certain way of presenting a certain reality. They have a way of infusing themselves, and that's why you get that writer to do that. In the same way that what drove him to get the same composer for Hitchcock, you get that because there is I attribute this to you. I don't look at this now through this lens. I don't look at this as laziness. Like you said, I see it as their voice, or even more, it's their fingerprint. It's not something that they can control. It's just something that inherently that they are. That is a part of their code. It's a part of their genes. And I think them leaving their mark, their fingerprint on this landscape, the medium is made better for it.
Couldn't agree more.